This is it. It has actually happened. This is the moment that Newcastle United have truly arrived. This is the moment that you need to recondition your mind. You need to redefine Newcastle United, however you have viewed Newcastle United, whatever they represent to you, a feeling that has been built up over the past 2-3 decades, whatever. Your feeling of Newcastle United now needs to change. The signing of Sandro Tonali is an exquisite signing, and it represents that Newcastle United need to be taken so very seriously. For the first time since the PIF took over Newcastle, they have gone to a truly elite club in the face of elite competition, and they have signed a truly elite player. That is what they have gone and done, to go over to Serie A giants, to go over to one of the most iconic football teams in the world, a team that I adore because of the history and the heritage, to go over there and prize from them their best player, their jewel in the crown, an icon, a fan, a local. It really does represent quite who Newcastle United are today. Look, they're a club in the Champions League, right? But what they have done in going over to Milan, and let's remember who they are. Milan, one of the biggest clubs in the world. Recent semi-finalists in the European Cup. One of the most prestigious clubs to have ever existed. Think of the players. When you think of football, it's impossible to not think of AC Milan. It's impossible to not think of Marco van Basten wearing that kit. Shevchenko wearing that kit. Ruud Gullit wearing that kit. The San Siro. I am honoured to have been to the San Siro only once. And sadly, it was to see Inter Milan play. I saw Solomon Kalou score for Chelsea in the San Siro. But AC Milan are the team. They are that team. And the fact that Tonali has gone to Newcastle. Remember, Tonali's a fan. He's a local. And he stood with his father on the curver whilst he was a child. And yet he has decided that the allure of Newcastle is impossible for him to ignore. He is the jewel in the crown of that team. And yet he has chosen to leave. He's leaving his hometown, the club he supports, the club passed down to him from generations above him, and he's gone to Newcastle. 70 million euros. It's a very expensive fee, but Newcastle United can do that. And you have to admire the way that Newcastle United actually do their business, because since the PIF have arrived, they haven't really splashed the cash in the way that they could. I know they have constraints. I know they're not really allowed to. I know that FFP is an issue for them. But when you think about what the PIF have done with Live Golf, for example, or even the Saudi Domestic League, trying to attract the biggest names, throwing money at the golf, they haven't done that at Newcastle. It's been wise, measured, well thought out spending. And Eddie Howe deserves an awful lot of credit. But 70 million, look, it's a record fee in Italy. It drastically eclipses the previous record fee, which was the fee that Chelsea spent on Jorginho, which was, I think, 57 million. We paid Napoli 57 million, which was the most expensive fee for an Italian footballer. So this has drastically surpassed that. But 70 million, 23 years old, it actually feels like really, really, it's money well spent, isn't it? And look, Newcastle have spent big money before. They've spent big money on big players before. But to me, this just feels different. Do you agree with me? If you do, will you do me a favour? Will you like this video? I want to monitor it. Because, of course, they've signed big players before. They signed Botman when lots of other people were admiring Botman. They signed Isaac. And that was a bit, not a panic buy, but it was done in a very deliberate, aggressive way because Callum Wilson got injured and they brought Isaac in. Obviously, when they signed Kieran Trippier, that was a bit of a statement. An England international, fresh off the back of winning La Liga. Bruno Guimaraes, obviously. But to me, this one feels different. The signing of Tonali feels so different. And if you agree with me, like this video. I really want to know, because some people may say this is just in keeping with what they do. Others may think that this actually does set the tone for a new look Newcastle United. And that is certainly how I feel. I don't know what it is, but it just feels more substantive. I mean, partly because of how good he is as a player. Obviously, that's going to have an impact. But I also think that it's the fact that he arrived from Milan. Newcastle United have gone to AC Milan, European Cup semi-finalists. Yeah, the record of that club, and they have plucked, certainly, I would say the best player, certainly top 3 out of the team, but crucially a local, crucially an icon, and crucially a fan. That is why this one just feels so much more substantive to me. And also because every club in Europe has been monitoring Tonali. Like, there was a time much earlier this year, January, February time, where Chelsea felt like we were front runners. Chelsea were talking to AC Milan about signing Tonali. And that wouldn't have felt out of place for Chelsea, I think. Chelsea could sign a player like Tonali, particularly then, before we realised that we wouldn't be in the Champions League the following season. And Chelsea also had a lot to offer. A lot of players from Chelsea were surplus to requirements. We could have made it a smooth passage for the transfer to happen. But he's chosen Newcastle. And therefore, we need to really acknowledge what this means for who Newcastle are. Also, we have to give an awful lot of credit to Eddie Howe. He really does do things the right way. He's been so impressive since he's been there. And, as a man, you've got to admire him. He recognised as a man where he was lacking. He recognised his managerial Achilles heel. And he went over to Spain, learned from Diego Simeone, went to Atletico Madrid on sabbatical to learn how to set up a defence. I think he would have been the first to admit that during his time at Bournemouth, his team were too porous. So he went over to learn from one of the best defensive-minded managers to have ever existed. That takes a lot, and it gives us an insight into who Eddie Howe is, Eddie Howe is clearly a man who doesn't possess the arrogance that a lot of people do. A lot of people in all industry, they wouldn't want the opportunity to improve. He could legitimately have said, I'm a Premier League manager. I don't need to go and learn from anyone. I'm a Premier League manager. I've been a Premier League manager. I don't need to go and learn. It tells us that the fact that he is prepared to acknowledge that he can improve, it's a very good trait. And the way that he set his team up, the way that he marshals the transfer market is also very impressive. Because he doesn't just sign good players. He signs good people who buy into his philosophy. Like he talks, doesn't he? I think he said, actually, which I found quite interesting, he said that the identity of Newcastle United, he said, the quote is, our identity is our intensity. And I think they've got the word intensity plastered on the wall at the training ground. So he's signing players that fit that mould, signing players who are prepared to play the way that he wants, that intense front foot football. And this is a huge signing for them, and it's going to make Newcastle United such a serious proposition next year because it will elevate the whole team, but it will certainly elevate that midfield, because the midfield at Newcastle was the one weak link. They were very frugal at the back. They didn't concede goals. Up front, they've got goals. Callum Wilson certainly knows where the back of the net is. Isaac looks like a serious player. They will always score goals, but the midfield could have certainly done with an elevation. And the midfield was always going to be Eddie Howe's priority this summer. So bringing in someone who can play alongside Bruno Guimaraes and lift some of the responsibility away from him. He's good enough to play with Guimaraes, of course. That makes their midfield one of the best in the league. But equally, when Guimaraes isn't available, the drop-off won't be so severe. Bruno Guimaraes last season missed 6 Premier League games. Newcastle didn't win any of them. So Newcastle last year, when Bruno Guimaraes wasn't in the team, they couldn't get a victory. That won't be the case this year because Tonali will be available. And the drop-off from Guimaraes to Tonali isn't a problem. But crucially, those two players can play with one another as well. So this is huge. It's a statement. It's massive. Newcastle United need to be taken incredibly seriously. And I'm going to be totally honest with you. I desperately hope that it doesn't work. I mean, it will work. It will. Eddie Howe's a very good manager. And I think that Newcastle are doing things incredibly well. But I really do not want this to work. I don't like the project. And fingers crossed that it doesn't. But that's how I feel about it. I'll do a video on that another day, I think. But for today, all I can say is Tonali is a great signing. And if you are a Geordie, as my missus is, I think today is a brilliant day for your football team. There we have it. Bad news for the rest of the Premier League. Great news for Newcastle United. Do me a favour. If you are new around here, please click that subscribe button. Please. It would be my honour to welcome you into this community. I love what we're doing here. I love the feedback, and I will be in the comments below. So let me know, do you agree with my assessment here? Newcastle United need to be redefined and taken very seriously. Could they launch a serious bid for the Premier League title? Why not?